September 17th, 1944. 1 p.m. The Dutch countryside trembles. Above the flat farmland of the Netherlands, the sky darkens, not with storm clouds, but with aircraft. See, 47 Dakotas stretch from horizon to horizon, their engines a low, unrelenting roar that shakes the earth below. Inside the cramped fuselages, paratroopers sit shoulder to shoulder, laden with weapons, ammunition, and rations. The air smells of fuel, sweat, and fear. Some men pray. Others smoke their last cigarette. A few stare at the red light above the door, waiting for it to turn green. Below, Dutch civilians emerge from their homes, shielding their eyes against the sun. They see the formations, hundreds of them, stretching back into the sky like an iron river. Then the first parachutes bloom. White canopies fill the air, drifting down like seeds scattered by an impossibly violent wind. Gliders cut loose from their tow planes, descending in near silence before crashing into fields with splintering wood and dust. This is not D-Day. This is something larger, bolder, more desperate. This is Operation Market Garden, the largest airborne operation in history, the brainchild of one general who believed he could drop an entire army behind enemy lines, seize a corridor of bridges, and end the war by Christmas. What followed would redefine the limits of ambition, the cost of overconfidence, and the brutal reality of war when a plan meets the enemy. By the summer of 1944, the war in Europe had reached a moment of violent acceleration. The Allied breakout from Normandy in late July, Operation Cobra, shattered the German defensive line in France. American, British, and Canadian forces surged eastward through the hedgerows, across the Seine, and into Belgium. Paris fell on August 25th. Brussels was liberated on September 3rd. In less than 6 weeks, the Allies advanced over 400 miles, reclaiming territory the Germans had held for 4 years. It felt like victory was within reach. On the ground, soldiers moved faster than supply trucks could follow. Fuel depots sat hundreds of miles behind the front lines. Ammunition stockpiles dwindled. The logistical arteries that fed the Allied war machine, roads, railways, ports, were stretched to breaking. The port of Antwerp, captured intact on September 4th, remained unusable. The Germans still controlled the Scheldt estuary, blocking access to the sea. Every gallon of gasoline, every artillery shell, every can of rations had to be trucked from the beaches of Normandy, over bombed-out roads, through a supply chain gasping for breath. By early September, the momentum was slowing. Patton's Third Army, racing toward the German border, ground to a halt for lack of fuel. Eisenhower, the supreme Allied commander, faced an agonizing choice: consolidate the gains, wait for supply lines to catch up, and prepare for a methodical advance into Germany, or strike now, while the Germans were reeling, and try to end the war before winter. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery, commander of British 21st Army Group, saw an opportunity. A narrow one, a dangerous one, but an opportunity nonetheless. Montgomery was a meticulous planner, cautious by nature, yet haunted by the fear that the war would drag into 1945, that the Wehrmacht would regroup, that German industry would churn out more tanks and planes, that the cost in blood would climb higher still. He proposed a bold alternative, a single thrust north through the Netherlands, across the Rhine, and into the industrial heart of Germany. If successful, it would bypass the Siegfried Line, outflank the German defenses, and open a direct path to Berlin. But there was a problem. The route north was bisected by rivers and canals, natural barriers that funneled any advance onto a handful of bridges. The Maas, the Waal, the lower Rhine at Arnhem. If those bridges were destroyed, the offensive would collapse. If they could be seized intact, the door to Germany would swing open. Montgomery's solution was audacious. Use airborne forces to capture the bridges before the Germans could blow them. Drop paratroopers and glider infantry behind enemy lines, secure the crossings, and hold them until a ground column, XXX Corps, could punch through from the Belgian border and link up. The operation would require 3 entire airborne divisions: the U.S. 101st and 82nd and the British 1st Airborne. Over 35,000 men would descend from the sky in the largest vertical envelopment ever attempted. The plan had a name: Operation Market Garden. Market for the airborne drops, Garden for the ground advance. It would begin on September 17, 1944. Eisenhower, desperate to maintain momentum, approved it. He allocated precious transport aircraft, diverted supplies, and gave Montgomery the green light. But even as the orders went out, warning signs emerged. Intelligence reports indicated German armored units near Arnhem, SS Panzer Divisions refitting after their mauling in France. Reconnaissance photographs showed tanks in the woods. Officers raised concerns. Major Brian Urquhart, a British intelligence officer, argued the plan was too risky. He was removed from duty, deemed exhausted and overly cautious. Montgomery dismissed the warnings. The Germans were broken, he insisted. Disorganized, incapable of mounting serious resistance. The airborne troops would land, secure the bridges, and within 48 hours, British tanks would be across the Rhine. The war would be over by Christmas. It was a gamble, one that hinged on speed, surprise, and the assumption that the enemy was weaker than they were. The mechanics of Operation Market Garden were staggering in their complexity. 3 airborne divisions would drop along a 64-mile corridor stretching from the Belgian-Dutch border to Arnhem. The U.S. 101st Airborne, the Screaming Eagles, would seize bridges around Eindhoven in the south. The 82nd Airborne, the All-American, would take the crossings at Grave and Nijmegen over the Maas and Waal Rivers. The British 1st Airborne Division, supported by the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade, would capture the final prize, the bridge at Arnhem, over the Lower Rhine. Behind them, Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks' XXX Corps, 20,000 vehicles, tanks, armored cars, and supply trucks, would advance up a single highway. The Dutch called it Route 69. The soldiers would come to call it something else: Hell's Highway. It was a two-lane road, raised above the flat, marshy terrain of the Netherlands, with no room to maneuver. If the column stalled, there would be no flanking, no alternate routes. Just a traffic jam under German fire. The timeline was brutal. The 101st had to hold Eindhoven until XXX Corps arrived, estimated at 12 hours. The 82nd had to secure Nijmegen's massive road bridge within 24 hours. The British 1st Airborne had to hold Arnhem for 48 hours until relief came. After that, the tanks would roll across the Rhine, swing east into Germany, and the war would be won. On paper, it was brilliant. In reality, it was brittle. The airlift alone required over 1,500 transport aircraft and 500 gliders, flying in broad daylight, vulnerable to flak and fighters. Weather was unpredictable. Radio equipment was known to be unreliable over distance. Drop zones were miles from the bridges, a compromise forced by terrain and the fear of landing directly on German guns. Every assumption depended on the Germans being too weak, too slow, or too disorganized to respond. And they were not. Across the Rhine, German commanders watched the Allied advance with grim calculation. Field Marshal Walter Model, commander of Army Group B, had spent August retreating across France, trying to salvage what was left of his shattered forces. By September, he had established a defensive line along the Dutch-German border. His units were battered, under strength, and short on fuel, but they were not broken. SS Obergruppenführer Wilhelm Bittrich's 2 SS Panzer Corps was in the Arnhem area, refitting after the retreat. 2 divisions, the 9th SS Panzer Hohenstaufen and the 10th SS Panzer Frundsberg. They had been mauled in Normandy, but they still had tanks, experienced crews, and officers who knew how to fight. Model's headquarters was in a hotel in Oosterbeek, less than 5 miles from the planned British drop zones at Arnhem. By sheer chance, one of the most capable German commanders in the West would be sitting almost on top of the largest Allied airborne operation in history. But the Allies didn't know that, or they chose not to believe it. On the morning of September 17th, final preparations began. Paratroopers checked their equipment, sharpened their knives, loaded their rifles. Pilots ran through pre-flight checklists. Glider infantrymen squeezed into their flimsy plywood transports, packed in with jeeps, anti-tank guns, and ammunition. The sky over England filled with the sound of engines. Hundreds of planes lifted off from dozens of airfields, forming up into columns that stretched for miles. At 10:25 a.m., the first aircraft crossed the Dutch coast. Allied fighters swept ahead, strafing German flak positions. Bombers pounded known anti-aircraft batteries. The air armada flew on, unmolested, majestic, and terrifying. Dutch civilians below waved, cheered through flowers. They believed liberation had come. By 1 p.m., the drops began. Men tumbled from the doors of C-47s, parachutes cracking open in the slipstream. Gliders cut loose and dove toward the earth. Pilots wrestling with the controls, trying to avoid trees, ditches, and each other. The noise was deafening. The chaos was total. And for a few brief hours, everything seemed to go according to plan. The 101st landed near Eindhoven and began moving toward their objectives. The 82nd secured the bridge at Grave within an hour, a textbook success. The British 1st Airborne landed west of Arnhem and began marching toward the city. Resistance was light. Casualties were minimal. The airborne phase of Market Garden had achieved near total surprise. But the clock was already ticking, and in the woods around Arnhem, German tank crews were climbing into their Panzers, engines coughing to life, turrets swinging toward the sound of gunfire. Model, stunned by the scale of the airborne assault, recovered quickly. He barked orders, sent reinforcements, and prepared to crush the British paratroopers before they could dig in. The operation had begun flawlessly. It would not stay that way for long. Inside AC, 47 Dakota, time moves differently. The flight from England to the Netherlands takes roughly 2 hours, but for the men packed into the fuselage, it feels like days. They sit on canvas benches, knees pressed against the man across from them, parachutes bulging against their backs. The noise is overwhelming. Engines roaring, metal rattling, wind screaming past the open door. Some men try to sleep. Others stare at nothing. A few joke, voices too loud, laughter too sharp. Private James Sims of the British 1st Airborne checks his rifle for the 3rd time. He's 21 years old. He's never jumped into combat before. None of his section has. They trained for months in England, running mock assaults, learning to pack parachutes, memorizing the layout of Dutch bridges from grainy reconnaissance photos. But training and reality are different animals. The jumpmaster, a sergeant with 2 combat drops already under his belt, moves down the line, checking static lines, patting shoulders, shouting encouragement no one can hear. Then the red light comes on. Stand up. Hook up. Check equipment. Sound off for equipment check. The drill is automatic now, drilled into muscle memory. The men shuffle toward the door. Outside, the Dutch countryside spreads out below, flat and green, stitched together with canals and roads. Flak bursts bloom in the distance, black puffs against the blue sky. Sims feels his stomach tighten. His hands shake. The jumpmaster grips the edge of the door, staring at the light. Green. Go. The first man disappears. Then the next. Sims moves forward, doesn't think, just steps into the void. The wind hits him like a fist. The static line yanks his parachute open. There's a jolt, a hard tug on his shoulders, and suddenly he's floating. The roar of the engines fades. The world becomes strangely quiet. Below, other parachutes drift down. Hundreds of them. Thousands. It looks like snowfall. Then the ground rushes up. Sims bends his knees, hits hard, rolls. Pain shoots through his ankle. He ignores it, pops the quick release on his harness, grabs his rifle. Around him, men are landing, gathering equipment, forming up into sections. An officer shouts orders. They move out, jogging toward the tree line. Somewhere ahead, the city of Arnhem waits. Somewhere closer, the Germans are already moving. For the men of the 1st Airborne, the drop is exhilarating and terrifying in equal measure. They've achieved surprise. They've landed safely. But they're miles from their objective, and the Germans know they're here. The march to the bridge begins. Tactical, vertical envelopment. Operation Market Garden represents the apex of a doctrine that had been evolving since World War I. Vertical envelopment. The idea is simple in theory. Use aircraft to bypass enemy defenses, drop troops behind the front lines, and seize key terrain before the enemy can react. In practice, it's one of the most complex operations in modern warfare. Airborne forces are fragile. They land with limited ammunition, no heavy weapons, and no immediate resupply. They rely on speed, surprise, and audacity. If they can seize their objectives quickly and hold until relieved, they can unlock battles that would otherwise cost thousands of lives in frontal assaults. If they're isolated, surrounded, or hit by armored counterattacks, they die. Market Garden takes this doctrine to an unprecedented scale. 3 full divisions, over 35,000 men, dropping not just to seize a single objective, but to create an entire corridor of bridges stretching 64 miles through enemy territory. It's airborne warfare as strategic maneuver, not tactical raid. The Allies are attempting to drop an entire army behind German lines and use it as the spearhead of a breakthrough. The inspiration comes from earlier successes. During the invasion of Sicily in 1943, Allied paratroopers seized key roads and caused chaos behind Italian lines, though the drops were scattered and costly. On D-Day, June 6, 1944, American and British airborne divisions dropped into Normandy, securing the flanks of the invasion beaches. The 82nd and 101st Airborne disrupted German reinforcements, seized bridges, and held critical positions despite being scattered across miles of French countryside. The Germans had never faced airborne assault on that scale, and it worked barely. Market Garden is supposed to be D-Day on steroids. Bigger, faster, more decisive, but the challenges are immense. The transport aircraft must fly in broad daylight, in tight formations, vulnerable to flak. The drop zones are spread out, requiring troops to march miles to their objectives, time the Germans can use to react. The ground force, XXX Corps, must advance up a single road, unable to maneuver, dependent entirely on the airborne forces holding the bridges. If any link in the chain breaks, the entire operation collapses. And there are a lot of links. Technological, the Armada. The air fleet assembled for Market Garden is the largest in history. Over 1,500 C-47 Dakota transport planes, nearly 500 gliders, Waco CG, 4 as in British horses, flimsy plywood boxes towed behind tugs, packed with troops, jeeps, and artillery. Hundreds of fighter escorts, P-47 Thunderbolts and Spitfires, sweep ahead, hunting for German fighters and flak positions. The logistics of launching this armada are staggering. Each C-47 carries 18 to 20 paratroopers. Each glider holds a section of infantry, sometimes with a jeep or a 6-pounder anti-tank gun strapped inside. Pilots must fly in tight formation, navigate by landmarks, and hit drop zones measured in hundreds of yards, all while flying at 1,500 feet, slow, vulnerable, and under fire. The coordination required is extraordinary. Aircraft take off from bases across southern England, form up over the Channel, cross the Dutch coast in waves, and deliver their loads within minutes of each other. The C-47 is not a combat aircraft. It's a cargo plane, unarmed, unarmored, with a cruising speed of 160 miles per hour. It's designed to haul supplies, not fight wars. But it's reliable, sturdy, and can absorb punishment. Pilots call it the Goonie bird. Paratroopers call it a flying coffin. When the red light comes on and the door opens, they jump anyway. The gliders are worse. Built from plywood and canvas, they're designed for a single trip. Once released from their tow plane, they glide down in near silence, unable to maneuver, unable to defend themselves. Pilots aim for open fields, pray they don't hit a tree or a ditch, and brace for impact. Crashes are common. Men break legs, crack ribs, get crushed by shifting cargo. But gliders can carry heavy equipment that paratroopers can't: jeeps, radios, medical supplies, ammunition. They're essential, and they're expendable. On September 17th, the Armada flies in perfect weather. Clear skies, light winds. Allied air superiority is total. German flak batteries fire, but the volume of aircraft is so overwhelming that most planes get through. The drop is the most successful in the history of airborne warfare. Casualties during the jump are minimal. Equipment losses are light. For a few hours, technology works exactly as planned. But technology has limits. The radios issued to the British 1st Airborne are temperamental. They work in England. They fail in the Netherlands. Frequencies don't match. Terrain interferes. Within hours, British commanders lose contact with their battalions. They can't call in air support. They can't coordinate with XXX Corps. They can't even talk to each other. And without communication, the plan begins to unravel. Field Marshal Walter Model is eating lunch when the sky fills with parachutes. His headquarters, the Tafelberg Hotel in Oosterbeek, sits less than 5 miles from the British drop zones. Model is 53 years old, lean, sharp-featured, and known for his ability to stabilize collapsing fronts. He earned the nickname the Führer's Fireman for his ability to extinguish crises on the Eastern Front. In September 1944, he's trying to hold together the western defenses of the Third Reich with units that have been gutted in France. When the first reports arrive, British paratroopers landing west of Arnhem. Model assumes it's a raid, a small-scale operation to disrupt communications or capture him personally. He orders his staff to pack up and evacuate. Vehicles screech out of the hotel courtyard, racing east toward Germany. Only when reconnaissance reports flood in, hundreds of aircraft, thousands of paratroopers, massive glider landings, does Model realize the scale of what's happening. This is not a raid. This is an invasion. Model is many things, but he is not slow. Within an hour, he's issuing orders. SS Obergruppenführer Wilhelm Bittrich, commander of 2 SS Panzer Corps, is told to deploy his forces immediately. The 9th SS Panzer Division will move into Arnhem and crush the British paratroopers before they can consolidate. The 10th SS Panzer Division will head south toward Nijmegen, blocking the American advance. Local garrison units, rear echelon troops, training battalions, even police units, are mobilized and sent to the bridges. The Germans are shocked, but they are not paralyzed. SS Hauptsturmführer Victor Grabner, a panzer reconnaissance officer, races toward Arnhem with a column of armored cars and half-tracks. He doesn't wait for orders. He sees British paratroopers moving through the woods and opens fire. His vehicles have speed, armor, and machine guns. The paratroopers have rifles and a few anti-tank weapons. Grabner's unit slams into the British column, scattering it, delaying it, buying precious time for reinforcements to arrive. By nightfall on September 17th, the German response is taking shape. The British 1st Airborne, which landed expecting light resistance, is now facing SS Panzer troops, veteran soldiers with tanks, assault guns, and the tactical experience of years on the Eastern Front. The Germans don't have enough forces to crush the entire airborne operation, but they have enough to slow it down, to block key roads, to turn a swift coup de main into a grinding battle of attrition. Bittrich, a pragmatic and ruthless commander, sees the Allied plan clearly. The British are trying to seize the Arnhem Bridge. If they succeed, the Rhine is breached. If they fail, the entire operation collapses. He concentrates his forces on Arnhem, ordering his panzers to hold the bridge at all costs and to destroy the British battalions trying to reach it. For the Germans, Market Garden is a crisis, but also an opportunity. If they can isolate the airborne divisions, cut them off from resupply, and defeat them in detail, they can hand the Allies a catastrophic defeat. And that's exactly what they intend to do. Bernard Law Montgomery is 56 years old, a teetotaler, a non-smoker, and a man who believes in meticulous planning. He rose to fame in North Africa, defeating Rommel at El Alamein through careful preparation and overwhelming material superiority. He believes in set-piece battles, in concentrating forces, in never attacking until victory is certain. Operation Market Garden is none of those things. It's a gamble, a high-risk, high-reward operation born from desperation and ambition in equal measure. Montgomery is haunted by the memory of World War I, where British armies bled themselves white in grinding attrition. He's determined to avoid that fate. If Market Garden succeeds, the war ends in 1944. If it fails, the war drags into 1945 and thousands more die. But there's another factor at play: rivalry. American General George S. Patton, commander of the U.S. Third Army, is racing toward Germany from the south. Patton is aggressive, flamboyant, and hungry for glory. If Patton crosses the Rhine first, he'll overshadow Montgomery, claim credit for winning the war, and dominate the history books. Montgomery cannot allow that. Market Garden is as much about ego as it is about strategy. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander, is caught in the middle. He respects Montgomery's caution, but is frustrated by his slowness. He admires Patton's aggression, but fears his recklessness. Eisenhower adopts a broad front strategy, advancing along the entire Western Front, stretching German defenses, grinding them down through attrition. Montgomery hates it. He argues for a single thrust, concentrate forces, punch through in one place, and drive straight to Berlin. Market Garden is Montgomery's attempt to prove his strategy correct. Eisenhower, desperate to maintain momentum after the breakout from Normandy, approves it, but with reservations. He allocates supplies, aircraft, and troops, but he doesn't fully commit. Patton's offensive in the south continues. Resources are split. Montgomery gets what he needs from Market Garden, but not everything he wants. On the ground, Lieutenant General Frederick Boy Browning, commander of the Allied Airborne Corps, voices concerns. The plan is too ambitious, he argues, too dependent on perfect timing, too vulnerable to German counterattack. When told that XXX Corps must reach Arnhem within 48 hours, Browning reportedly says, "We might be going a bridge too far." Montgomery dismisses the doubts. The Germans are finished, he insists. Broken, demoralized, incapable of serious resistance. The airborne troops will seize the bridges. XXX Corps will link up. The war will be over. He's betting 35,000 lives on that assumption. XXX Corps begins its advance at 2:35 p.m. on September 17th, 35 minutes after the first paratroopers hit the ground. Lieutenant General Brian Horrocks, a charismatic and energetic commander, stands on a tank turret and watches as 300 guns open fire simultaneously. The barrage is deafening, a rolling curtain of high explosive that crashes down on German positions along the Dutch border. Then the tanks roll forward. The lead unit is the Irish Guards Armored Division. Their job is simple: drive up Route 69, link up with the 101st Airborne at Eindhoven, then push north to Nijmegen and Arnhem. The distance is 64 miles. The timeline is 48 hours. The road is narrow, raised above flooded fields, and completely exposed. Within minutes, the advance grinds to a halt. German anti-tank guns, hidden in the woods, open fire. The first Sherman tank explodes in flames, blocking the road. The second tank tries to push it aside, gets hit, and burns. The column stops. Infantry dismount and clear the woods on foot, fighting through machine gun nests and snipers. It takes hours. By nightfall on the first day, XXX Corps has advanced less than 10 miles. The Germans have turned Route 69 into a killing ground. The road is a single artery, 2 lanes wide, with ditches on either side. Vehicles can't maneuver off-road. The ground is too soft, crisscrossed with canals and flooded fields. Every bridge, every village, every crossroads becomes a choke point. The Germans don't have enough troops to stop XXX Corps outright, but they don't need to. They just need to delay it. And they do. German assault guns fire from tree lines, then withdraw before Allied artillery can respond. Snipers pick off tank commanders. Engineers blow bridges and crater roads. Panzerfaust teams hide in ditches, waiting for British tanks to rumble past, then fire into their thinner side armor. The advance becomes a crawl. By September 18th, XXX Corps has linked up with the 101st Airborne at Eindhoven, but the schedule is already slipping. The tanks are supposed to be in Nijmegen. They're not. They're still fighting their way north, tangled in traffic, under constant harassment. The airborne divisions are holding the bridges, but they're isolated, running low on ammunition, and facing German counterattacks that grow stronger by the hour. The ground reality is brutal. Market Garden is a race against time, and time is running out. September 17th, 1944. 8 p.m. Arnhem Bridge. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost and roughly 750 men of the 2nd Battalion, 1st Parachute Brigade, reached the northern end of the Arnhem Road Bridge. It's a massive steel structure, over 600 yards long, spanning the lower Rhine. Frost's orders are simple. Seize the bridge. Hold it until XXX Corps arrives. He expects relief within 48 hours. The southern end of the bridge is still in German hands. Frost's men dig in around the buildings on the northern approach, townhouses, offices, a school. They set up machine gun positions, stack ammunition, and wait. Around them, the city of Arnhem is eerily quiet. Civilians peer from windows, uncertain whether to celebrate or hide. Frost's radio operator tries to contact division headquarters. The radio crackles with static. No response. Frost doesn't know it yet, but he's alone. The rest of the 1st Airborne Division is scattered across the countryside west of Arnhem. The 1st and 3rd Parachute Brigades, marching toward the city along different routes, have run into German blocking positions. SS Panzer Grenadiers, supported by armored cars and self-propelled guns, have set up ambushes along the roads. The British battalions, lightly armed and moving on foot, are pinned down. Casualties mount. Progress stalls. Brigadier Gerald Lathbury, commander of the 1st Parachute Brigade, is shot by a sniper and seriously wounded. Command breaks down. Companies lose contact with each other. The radios, those damn radios, refuse to work. Officers resort to sending runners, but runners get lost, get killed, or arrive too late. By nightfall, only Frost Battalion has reached the bridge. The other battalions are still fighting through the woods and suburbs, trying to push forward. They're tough, well-trained, and determined, but they're up against veteran SS troops with tanks. The balance of forces is shifting and not in the British favor. At the bridge, Frost's men settle in for the night. They don't sleep. German patrols probe their positions. Gunfire echoes across the river. Around midnight, a convoy of German vehicles, half-tracks, trucks, armored cars, races across the bridge from the south, trying to reinforce the defenders in the city. Frost's men open fire. Panzerfaust streak through the darkness. Vehicles explode in flames, lighting up the night. The convoy is destroyed. Bodies lie scattered across the bridge deck. The Germans realize the British hold the northern end. They can't cross, and they can't allow the British to stay. September 18th, 1944. Nijmegen. 60 miles to the south, the 82nd Airborne is facing its own crisis. The division has successfully captured the bridge over the Waal River at Grave, a critical early success. But the main objective, the massive road bridge over the Waal River at Nijmegen, is still in German hands. Nijmegen is the largest city in the operational area, a medieval town with narrow streets and thick-walled buildings. The bridge is a fortress. German engineers have wired it with demolition charges. Machine gun nests cover both approaches. Assault guns are positioned in the streets. Brigadier General James Gavin, the 31-year-old commander of the 82nd, orders an assault. The 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment pushes into the city, fighting house to house. The Germans resist savagely. Every street corner is contested. Snipers fire from church towers. Panzerfausts ambush American squads in alleys. The fighting is vicious, chaotic, and slow. Gavin is aggressive and hands-on, personally leading reconnaissance patrols to scout the German defenses. He's frustrated by the delays. XXX Corps is supposed to be linking up, but the British tanks are still miles away, stuck on Hell's Highway, battling their way north through German ambushes. By the evening of September 18th, the 82nd has cleared most of Nijmegen, but the bridge is still held. Worse, German reinforcements, elements of the 10th SS Panzer Division, are moving into the area. The Americans can hear the rumble of tank engines in the distance. Time is running out. September 19th, 1944. Arnhem Bridge. Frost's position is deteriorating. The Germans have brought up reinforcements, self-propelled guns, mortars, flamethrowers. They attack from the south, trying to rush the bridge. Frost's men hold them off, but ammunition is running low. Medical supplies are nearly gone. The aid station is overflowing with wounded. The perimeter shrinks. Buildings around the bridge are on fire, set ablaze by German incendiary rounds. Flames leap from rooftops. Smoke chokes the streets. Frost men move through burning rooms, dragging wounded comrades to basements, trying to find cover. The heat is unbearable. The noise is constant. Machine guns, grenades, the crack of rifles, the scream of wounded men. Still they hold. The Germans try again. Armored cars race across the bridge under covering fire. British paratroopers, armed with Piats, spring-loaded anti-tank weapons, fire from upper windows. One car is hit, slews sideways, and explodes. Another crashes into the wreckage. The assault fails. But Frost knows the end is near. There's been no word from division headquarters. No sign of XXX Corps. No resupply. The British 1st Airborne Division is supposed to be reinforcing him, but they're not coming. He doesn't know why. He doesn't know that most of the division is trapped miles away, surrounded, fighting for survival. On the afternoon of September 19th, German 88mm guns are brought up. They fire directly into the British positions at point-blank range. Buildings collapse. Walls explode inward. Men are buried in rubble. The perimeter fractures. Frost himself is wounded by shrapnel, his legs torn open. He's carried to the cellar, where the aid station has become a slaughterhouse. Still, the survivors fight on. A few dozen men, dirty, exhausted, nearly out of ammunition, holding a burned-out ruin against an entire SS division. They will hold the bridge for 4 days, far longer than anyone thought possible. But it won't be enough. September 20th, 1944. 3 p.m. The Waal River, Nijmegen. Major Julian Cook stands on the south bank of the Waal River, staring at the water. It's 400 yards wide, cold, and fast-moving. On the far side, German machine guns are dug into the embankment. Behind them, the northern approach to the Nijmegen Bridge. Cook's mission is insane. Cross the river in broad daylight, in canvas boats, under fire, and seize the bridge before the Germans blow it. He has 26 boats. Each holds 13 men. The boats are flimsy, collapsible, designed for training exercises, not for amphibious assault under combat conditions. Cook's men, troopers of the 3rd Battalion, 504th Parachute Infantry Regiment, have never trained for this. They're paratroopers, not Marines. But there's no other option. The ground assault into Nijmegen has stalled. The bridge is still held. XXX Corps tanks have finally arrived, but they can't cross without the bridge. The entire operation is on the verge of collapse. British tanks line the southern bank, engines idling. Their job is to provide covering fire. At 3 p.m., they open up, a thunderous barrage that hammers the far bank. Smoke shells burst, laying a thin screen across the water. Cook blows his whistle. The paratroopers drag their boats to the water's edge and shove off. Immediately, the Germans open fire. Bullets whip across the water, punching through canvas, splintering paddles, tearing into flesh. Men scream. Boats capsize. Troopers, weighed down by equipment, sink and drown. The river turns red. Cook's boat takes multiple hits, but stays afloat. He yells at his men to paddle faster, paddle harder. The crossing feels like it takes hours. It takes 8 minutes. Those who reach the far bank scramble up the muddy embankment, soaking wet, gasping for air. German machine guns are less than 50 yards away. The paratroopers charge. They don't use tactics. They don't have time. They just run, firing from the hip, throwing grenades, screaming. The German positions collapse under the sheer ferocity of the assault. Within an hour, Cook's men have secured the northern end of the bridge. Simultaneously, British tanks and American infantry assault the southern end. The Germans, caught between two forces, retreat. Engineers race onto the bridge to cut the demolition wires. The charges are disarmed. The bridge is intact. At 7:10 p.m. on September 20th, British tanks roll across the Nijmegen Bridge. It's a triumph, one of the most extraordinary small unit actions of the war. But it's 3 days late. The schedule for Market Garden called for XXX Corps to be across the Waal by September 18th. The delay is catastrophic. Because 11 miles to the north, the British 1st Airborne Division is dying. September 20th, 1944. Oosterbeek, west of Arnhem. The remnants of the 1st Airborne Division have been forced into a shrinking pocket around the village of Oosterbeek. They're surrounded, cut off, out of supplies. The original plan, to hold Arnhem Bridge until relief arrived, has collapsed. Frost Battalion, after holding the bridge for 4 days, has been overrun. The survivors, including Frost, are captured. The Germans now control the bridge. The rest of the division, roughly 3,000 men, are trapped in a perimeter less than 2 miles wide. They call it the Cauldron. German artillery pounds them day and night. SS Panzer Grenadiers probe the perimeter, looking for weak points. Snipers pick off anyone who moves. The British dig in among the gardens and houses of Oosterbeek, turning elegant villas into fortresses. Major General Roy Urquhart, commander of the 1st Airborne, has lost control of the battle. His radios don't work. He can't communicate with his battalions. He can't call in air support. He can't coordinate with XXX Corps. For 2 days, he was cut off from his own headquarters, trapped in an attic while German patrols searched the streets below. By the time he returned, the division was shattered. Supply drops are a disaster. RAF transport planes fly over the perimeter, dropping containers of ammunition, food, and medical supplies. But the drop zones are in German hands. The British watch helplessly as their desperately needed supplies drift into enemy lines. German soldiers unload British ammunition and turn British weapons against them. The irony is bitter. The wounded fill every cellar, every church, every building still standing. There are no beds, no anesthesia. Surgeons operate by candlelight, amputating limbs with handsaws, trying to save men who have no chance. The smell of gangrene and death hangs over the perimeter. Still, they fight. Sergeant Major John Baskyfield, a 21-year-old anti-tank gunner, holds a position alone after his crew is killed. He fires his 6-pounder gun at German tanks, reloading by himself, exposed to machine gun fire. He destroys 2 armored vehicles before he's killed by a mortar round. He's posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. Corporal Jeffrey Brace, wounded in the leg, refuses evacuation. He stays at his position, firing a Bren gun until he runs out of ammunition, then throws grenades until he collapses. Men like him are everywhere in the Cauldron, exhausted, wounded, starving, but still fighting. On September 21st, the Polish 1st Independent Parachute Brigade finally drops south of the Rhine, near the village of Driel. They're supposed to reinforce the British perimeter, but the Germans hold the bridge. The Poles can't cross. They watch from a southern bank, helpless, as the British die across the water. XXX Corps, having finally crossed at Nijmegen, pushes north toward Arnhem. But the road is narrow. The Germans have blown bridges and flooded fields. German anti-tank guns ambush the lead tanks. Progress is measured in yards. On the night of September 22nd, a few British engineers ferry a handful of Polish troops across the Rhine in small boats. It's not enough. The perimeter is collapsing. Casualties are catastrophic. Ammunition is nearly gone. The Germans bring up flamethrowers and burn the British out of their positions house by house. Lieutenant General Horrocks, commander of XXX Corps, meets with Urquhart. The conversation is brief. There will be no relief. The 1st Airborne must be evacuated or will be annihilated. On the night of September 25th, under cover of darkness and heavy rain, the survivors of the 1st Airborne withdraw across the Rhine. Engineers paddle boats back and forth, ferrying exhausted men across the cold water. German patrols fire blindly into the darkness. Some boats are hit. Men drown. Others make it across, collapsing on the southern bank, shaking, weeping alive. By dawn on September 26th, the evacuation is complete. Out of roughly 10,000 men who landed at Arnhem, fewer than 2,400 make it out. The rest are dead, wounded, or captured. Operation Market Garden is over. The Allies have not crossed the Rhine. The war will not end in 1944. September 26, 1944. South bank of the Rhine drill. The survivors stumble off the boats like ghosts. Their uniforms are caked with mud and blood. Their faces are hollow, eyes sunken, staring at nothing. Some collapse immediately. Others walk a few steps, then sit down in the rain and don't move. Medics rush forward, wrapping blankets around trembling shoulders, pressing canteens into shaking hands. No one speaks. There's nothing to say. Major General Roy Urquhart stands on the bank, watching his division dissolve. He landed with over 10,000 men 9 days ago. He's bringing fewer than 2,400 back. The rest are gone, killed in the streets of Arnhem, buried under rubble in Oosterbeek, captured and marched away to German POW camps. The 1st Airborne Division, one of Britain's elite units, has been destroyed. The casualty figures are staggering. The British 1st Airborne suffers approximately 1,485 killed and over 6,500 captured or missing. The Polish 1st Independent Paratroopers Brigade loses 378 men. The American 82nd and 101st Airborne, fighting further south, lose over 3,500 men combined. XXX Corps and supporting units add another 1,500 casualties. In total, Operation Market Garden cost the Allies roughly 17,000 men, more than the D-Day airborne operations. German losses are difficult to calculate precisely. Estimates range from 3,500 to 8,000 killed, wounded, and missing. The 2 SS Panzer Corps takes heavy casualties at Arnhem and Nijmegen, but the units remain combat effective. More importantly, the Germans have won a defensive victory that stabilizes their entire Western Front. The strategic failure is absolute. The Allies did not cross the Rhine. They did not outflank the Siegfried Line. They did not end the war in 1944. Instead, they've suffered the worst Allied defeat in Northwest Europe since D-Day, a humiliating reversal that hands the Germans a desperately needed morale boost. Field Marshal Montgomery, in his post-battle report, attempts to spin Market Garden as 90% successful. After all, XXX Corps captured Eindhoven and Nijmegen, secured a salient 60 miles deep into Holland, and liberated significant Dutch territory. But military historians are not fooled. The operation's objective was Arnhem. Arnhem failed. Therefore, the operation failed. Eisenhower is furious but restrained. He doesn't publicly criticize Montgomery. Allied unity must be maintained. Privately, he acknowledges that Market Garden was a bridge too far, a gamble that didn't pay off. The broad front strategy returns. The Allies will grind forward on all fronts, slowly, methodically, bleeding the Germans down through attrition. There will be no more daring thrusts. The port of Antwerp, captured in early September but still unusable due to German control of the Scheldt estuary, now becomes the priority. The Allies spend October and November clearing the approaches in brutal fighting through flooded terrain. It's the operation they should have prioritized from the start. Antwerp finally opens in late November, easing the supply crisis, but it's 2 months too late. For the soldiers who fought at Arnhem, the aftermath is deeply personal. Lieutenant Colonel John Frost, captured after the fall of the bridge, spends the rest of the war in a German POW camp. He survives, but many of his men do not. The wounded left behind at Oosterbeek receive surprisingly humane treatment from German medical staff, a rare moment of decency in a savage war. The Dutch civilians caught in the battle suffer immensely. Arnhem and Oosterbeek are shattered by artillery and street fighting. Thousands of civilians are evacuated, their homes destroyed. The liberation they hoped for turns into a nightmare. Worse, the German reprisals are brutal. Suspected resistance members are shot. Food supplies are cut off. The winter of 1944-45, known as the Hunger Winter, kills over 20,000 Dutch civilians from starvation. The psychological impact on the survivors is profound. Men who jumped into Holland believing they would end the war are shattered by failure. Some blame the plan. Some blame the commanders. Some blame themselves for not fighting harder, not holding longer. The guilt is crushing. In the decades after the war, many veterans return to Arnhem, walking the streets they fought through, visiting the cemeteries, trying to make sense of what happened. At the Arnhem Oosterbeek War Cemetery, over 1,750 Allied soldiers are buried. The headstones stretch in perfect rows, white stone against green grass. Most are British. Many are in their early 20s. Some graves are marked, known unto God. Unidentified bodies recovered from the rubble. Dutch schoolchildren adopt graves, placing flowers each year, keeping the memory alive. In England, the funerals begin. Families receive telegrams. Mothers weep. Fathers stare at photographs of sons who will never come home. The scale of the loss is stunning. Entire companies were wiped out. Some villages lose multiple men. The pride of a successful D-Day landings curdles into grief. The wounded fill hospitals across Britain. Some recover. Others never do. Amputees learn to walk again. Burn victims endure agonizing skin grafts. Shell-shocked men stare at walls, unable to speak, unable to forget. The cost of Market Garden is not just measured in numbers. It's measured in broken lives, in families destroyed, in future stolen. And in the minds of the survivors, one question echoes endlessly. What if? The failure of Operation Market Garden reverberates far beyond the battlefield. It forces a fundamental reassessment of Allied strategy, airborne doctrine, and the hubris that comes with assuming victory is inevitable. On a strategic level, Market Garden's collapse convinces Eisenhower that the war cannot be won with a single bold stroke. The German army, though battered and retreating, is far from broken. The Wehrmacht still has the ability to react, to counterattack, to exploit Allied mistakes. The fantasy of ending the war by Christmas 1944 evaporates. The Allies settle in for a long, grinding winter campaign. The German victory at Arnhem provides a desperately needed morale boost. Propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels seizes on the battle, portraying it as proof that the Reich can still win. Newsreels show captured British paratroopers marching into captivity, their red berets a symbol of Allied failure. For the German soldiers fighting in the West, Arnhem is validation. They can still hold the line, still bleed the enemy, still delay the inevitable. But the victory comes at a cost. The 2 SS Panzer Corps, battered in the fighting around Arnhem and Nijmegen, is pulled out of the line to refit. Those troops and tanks will be desperately needed 2 months later when Hitler launches his surprise offensive in the Ardennes, the Battle of the Bulge. Some historians argue that if the Germans hadn't committed so heavily to stopping Market Garden, they might have had more strength available for the Ardennes counteroffensive. Others argue the opposite, that the victory at Arnhem gave Hitler false confidence, convincing him that a major offensive could succeed. Either way, the German success at Arnhem does not change the outcome of the war. It delays the inevitable. By the spring of 1945, Allied armies will cross the Rhine in multiple places, encircle the Ruhr, and drive deep into Germany. But those crossings will be methodical, heavily prepared, and costly. The quick victory Market Garden promised never comes. For airborne forces, Market Garden becomes a cautionary tale. The operation exposes the fundamental vulnerabilities of large-scale airborne operations: dependence on surprise, fragility once on the ground, the catastrophic consequences of radio failure, and the danger of dropping far from objectives. The doctrine of vertical envelopment doesn't die. It evolves. Future airborne operations become smaller, more targeted, more closely coordinated with ground forces. The days of dropping entire divisions deep behind enemy lines are over. Airborne units shift toward rapid reaction roles, seizing key terrain during the initial hours of an invasion, then being relieved quickly. The lessons learned at Arnhem directly influence post-war military planning. During the 1950s and 60s, American and Soviet airborne forces focus on tactical drops, not strategic ones. Helicopters begin to replace parachutes as the primary means of delivering troops behind enemy lines. More flexible, more controllable, less dependent on perfect weather and drop zones. Technology improves. Radios become more reliable. Communication systems are tested rigorously in realistic terrain. The failures at Arnhem, where British commanders couldn't talk to their own battalions, ensure that future operations have redundant communication systems. The U.S. military, in particular, becomes obsessed with communication reliability, a lesson that pays dividends in every conflict from Korea to Iraq. The myth of the elite, airborne soldier also shifts. Market Garden proves that even the best-trained troops, dropped into the wrong situation with inadequate support, can be destroyed. Courage and training are not enough. Success requires intelligence, logistics, coordination, and, crucially, realistic planning that accounts for enemy capabilities, not just Allied hopes. Montgomery's reputation is permanently scarred. Before Market Garden, he was the hero of El Alamein, the cautious professional who never lost. After Market Garden, he's the general who gambled and lost. His insistence on a single-thrust strategy is discredited. His tendency to overestimate his own forces and underestimate the enemy is exposed. He remains in command. The political cost of sacking him would be too high, but his influence wanes. Eisenhower's broad front strategy becomes Allied doctrine for the rest of the war. Montgomery himself never fully accepts responsibility. In his memoirs, published after the war, he blames bad weather, faulty intelligence, and the failure of subordinate commanders. He insists that Market Garden was a sound plan, poorly executed. Historians are less forgiving. Most conclude that the plan was flawed from the start. Too ambitious, too dependent on optimistic assumptions, too willing to ignore warning signs. Lieutenant General Frederick Boy Browning, who allegedly warned that the operation might be a bridge too far, quietly fades from prominence. His reputation is mixed. Some see him as a prophet ignored. Others see him as a staff officer who approved the plan despite his doubts, making him complicit in the disaster. On the German side, Field Marshal Model gains further respect. His quick thinking and aggressive response at Arnhem demonstrate his ability to stabilize crises under pressure. He will continue commanding Army Group B until the final collapse in 1945, when he takes his own life rather than surrender. SS Obergruppenführer Wilhelm Bittrich is hailed as the architect of the Arnhem victory. His tactical skill and coolness under pressure are credited with stopping the British advance. He survives the war and lives quietly in post-war Germany, rarely speaking about his role. The logistical lessons are stark. Market Garden proves that airborne forces cannot be sustained by air supply alone, especially in contested airspace or bad weather. The supply drops at Arnhem, which fell into German hands, are a case study in what happens when logistics are secondary to speed. Future operations ensure that airborne forces are relieved quickly or not dropped at all. The single road, Hell's Highway, becomes a symbol of strategic bottlenecks. Military planners learn that a single axis of advance, no matter how heavily defended, is vulnerable to disruption. Flanking routes, alternate axes, and the ability to maneuver become essential components of operational planning. The image of British tanks sitting bumper to bumper on a raised road, unable to move, haunts generations of staff officers. The intelligence failures are equally instructive. The presence of the 9th and 10th SS Panzer Divisions near Arnhem was known. Aerial reconnaissance photographed the tanks, but the intelligence was dismissed as irrelevant. The Germans were supposedly too weak, too disorganized to matter. This represents a catastrophic failure of analysis, seeing what you want to see rather than what's actually there. Post-war intelligence doctrine emphasizes rigorous, skeptical analysis that challenges assumptions rather than confirming them. The human cost lingers longest. The families of the 1,485 British dead carry that loss forever. The Dutch families who starved during the Hunger Winter remember Market Garden not as a glorious attempt, but as the operation that brought devastation to their homes. The American paratroopers of the 82nd and 101st, who fought brilliantly and succeeded in their objectives, are forever overshadowed by the failure at Arnhem. Veterans return to the battlefield for decades. They walk the streets of Oosterbeek, visit the bridge at Arnhem, stand in the cemeteries. They remember friends who didn't come home. They grapple with survivor's guilt, with the question of whether more could have been done. Some find peace. Others never do. In the town of Arnhem, a museum preserves the memory. Uniforms, weapons, photographs, and personal letters tell the story. Visitors can walk the ground where the British paratroopers fought and died. The bridge, rebuilt after the war, is now named the John Frost Bridge, honoring the commander who held it against impossible odds. Each September, on the anniversary of the battle, veterans gather. Fewer each year. The youngest are now in their 90s. They wear their berets, their medals, their fading pride. Dutch civilians line the streets, applauding, laying flowers, ensuring that the sacrifice is not forgotten. The gratitude is genuine. The memory is sacred. Operation Market Garden becomes more than a battle. It becomes a metaphor for ambition outpacing capability, for the danger of ignoring intelligence, for the human cost of strategic miscalculation. It's studied in military academies worldwide, not as an example of what to do, but as a warning of what happens when hope replaces planning. And in the quiet rows of the Arnhem Cemetery, the dead remain. They jumped believing they would end the war. They fought believing relief was coming. They died believing their sacrifice mattered. History remembers them not for their failure, but for their courage in the face of impossible odds. There are battles that change the course of wars, and battles that reveal the nature of war itself. Operation Market Garden is the latter. It stands as a monument to human ambition, the belief that audacity, courage, and meticulous planning can overcome any obstacle. 35,000 men dropped from the sky, believing they could seize a corridor of bridges, breach the Rhine, and end the greatest conflict in human history months ahead of schedule. For a few hours on September 17, 1944, it seemed possible. The drops were successful. The surprise was total. The plan was in motion. But war does not obey plans. It obeys physics, logistics, and the will of the enemy. Market Garden collided with the reality that courage cannot compensate for faulty intelligence, that speed cannot replace supply lines, and that assumptions, no matter how reasonable they seem, can be lethally wrong. The Germans were not broken. The radios did not work. The single road became a death trap, and the 48-hour timeline stretched into 9 days of agony. What Market Garden reveals is the fragility of modern warfare. A single missing piece, reliable communication, accurate intelligence, a backup route, can unravel an entire operation. The British paratroopers at Arnhem fought with extraordinary valor, holding the bridge far longer than anyone thought possible. But valor alone could not bridge the 11 miles between them and relief. It could not make the radios work. It could not stop the SS Panzers. The operation also exposes the danger of hubris, the belief that victory is inevitable, that the enemy is finished, that one more bold stroke will end it all. Montgomery gambled 35,000 lives on the assumption that the Germans were incapable of serious resistance. He was wrong. The cost of that mistake was measured in graves, in shattered lives, in a winter of starvation for Dutch civilians, and in a war that dragged on for 8 more months. Yet Market Garden is not simply a story of failure. It is a story of men who jumped into the unknown, knowing the risks, and fought with everything they had. It is the story of John Frost Battalion, holding a burned-out ruin against an SS division for 4 days. It is the story of American paratroopers crossing the Waal River in canvas boats under withering fire. It is the story of British tankers grinding up Hell's Highway, fighting for every yard, trying desperately to reach their comrades. War asks the impossible of ordinary people. Market Garden asked it of 35,000 men, and most of them answered. They did not fail. The plan failed them. In the end, the battle teaches what all battles teach, that war is chaos, that plans are fragile, and that the human cost is always higher than anticipated. The rows of white headstones at Arnhem are not symbols of defeat. They are reminders of what happens when ambition meets reality, when hope confronts steel, and when men are asked to do the impossible. The survivors carry the memory. The dead rest in Dutch soil, far from home, honored by a nation they tried to liberate. And history remembers Operation Market Garden not as the operation that ended the war, but as the operation that proved wars are not won by gambles. They are won by patience, by grinding logistics, by facing hard truths. The bridge at Arnhem still stands. It carries traffic every day, and on its approaches, small plaques mark where men fought and died, believing that courage could span any distance, that sacrifice could shorten any war. They were wrong, but they were not forgotten.